I'm going
There we go.
to, and I'm going to start us off with just a little bit of an overview. As Raul mentioned, this is a two-part series about interviewing skills for a job. So if we could go to slide 2, please. Let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about today and then next week. In part 1 today, we'll spend a lot of time talking about how to prepare for an interview. So what do you do before an interview? We will also talk about the during an interview part, and importantly, give you a homework assignment, because in part 2, what we'd like you to be able to do is to actually practice what we talked about. So we will do a little bit of review next week first, just to remind you of some of the key pieces that we're going to discuss today. But then we're going to spend a big part of the hour where you have a chance to practice interviewing for a job with one of us, and then talk a little bit about how you did and what you might do differently. And then we will also talk a bit more about, after the interview, what are the steps that you should follow. So with that, let's move on to slide 3. So congratulations, you have applied for a job, you sent in a resume, and now you've been invited for an interview. What happens now? 2 big pieces. 1, prepare for the interview, and 2, go to the interview. And you will discover, I don't think this is going to be a surprise as we share this information, that by far the larger piece of the interview process is getting ready for it. Preparation is everything. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne. So very first things that you want to do when you're preparing for an interview, and we're going to discuss this a little more fully in a minute. The first thing you want to do is learn about the company that you're applying for. You want to think about 2 very important pieces. Firstly, what you can bring to the job. And secondly, what the job can offer you, why you're applying for this particular job. Then you're going to plan. Based on your research, you're going to think up some questions to ask the interviewer. And then we're going to talk about how to be organized for the interview, because there's quite a few things to plan so that you have your real best chance at having an excellent interview. So firstly, we want to learn about the company. So you're going to do some research. The easiest way to do this these days is by Googling the company and also that industry it belongs to, okay? Because you don't only want to find out about the company, but you want to find out where it belongs within the larger industry it belongs to, okay? Very easy to do that with Google these days, and you can get some very full information. So you want to make a note when you're Googling of the information that is important. So I do want to stress, we'll give you a number of things here to look for, but these are only examples of the kinds of things that you might want to be looking for, okay? You can make a bigger list or a shorter list depending on what you find, all right? And for example, you'll probably find a lot more information if it's a really, really big multinational company. If it's just a very small little local one-man company, for instance, you might find very little information. But the important thing here is to just feel well prepared, okay? So you want to feel that after you've done your research, you know quite a bit about the company. You can talk a little bit about the company. If someone asks you some questions or mentions some things the company does, you also know the right kind of vocabulary, okay? You know the names of the products the company makes, for example. So you're going to look at first, let's say, the type of company, the size, where it's located, when it was established, how old it is, has it been around a very long time or not very long, and what are the main products that it either makes or sells. Then you're going to look at perhaps its place in the industry. Is it a niche market, which means that it's one of a sort of number of specialized companies? Maybe they make a very specialized product. Is it a startup, or has it been around for a long time? What kind of growth has it had recently? And does it have the potential, or it looks as if it's going to have a lot of good growth soon? Okay, you want to apply to a company that looks fairly stable, right? You might consider some other relevant information. Who are the key personnel? What kinds of achievements has the company had? Is it notable for winning some awards? Is it very notable for being, a company that offers really good benefits to its employees? Does it care for its employees? That kind of thing. And also very important to you will be personnel information. This will be something that affects you directly. For example, the benefits package. Does it offer you good health care? The leave policy. What happens if, say, you're a woman and you get pregnant? Does it offer you maternity leave? Does it offer you compassionate leave if, someone in your family is sick and you need to take some extra time off? What are the promotion opportunities? Some companies have a policy of promoting from within, which is always very good news if you really want to get promoted within that company. So look at the opportunities for promotion. And also another feature is sometimes larger companies may have a community service commitment requirement. So some companies, for instance, will give all their employees a day off a year, and they need to spend that time doing some kind of community service. Okay, so all these things are going to affect you directly. So it's really good to know about those before you go into the interview, in case you have questions about something that you don't understand, or something that might be important to you but is not fully explained. Okay, so very important to do your research.
Okay, and once you've got a sense of that particular company, it's time to start thinking about what you bring to the job, or what you could bring to the job. And really think about this a little bit like a sales pitch. You're selling yourself, your skills to the company. And really, it is a way of you trying to show why you would be a good choice for that company. So how do you do that? Well, you've already put together a resume. In that resume, you've put together your list of strengths, your skills, relevant job experience. And one of the things you're going to want to do is now think about those strengths, skills, and experience, and take a look at that job that you're interested in and think a little bit about, how do my skills, my experience match up to this job that I'm interested in? Because the better you can explain how that works, the better chance you have of selling yourself, if you will, to the company. And one of the things we thought would be helpful for you to see is, just like you can Google the company that you're interested in and learn about the company, if you want, you can Google the most likely interview questions to be asked in a job interview. And there they are. Those bullets are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are about 10 that come up very frequently. We picked out 5. And even if you were asked a slightly different question, usually these questions revolve around these 5 different topics. Those first 2 questions, why do you want this job? And why do you think we should hire you? Really is about that what I was just talking about, the sales pitch, your strengths, skills, relevant experience, and how they match the job description. So, but think a little bit about, why do you want this job? That's a little bit broader question. It's really getting sometimes at that heart question, the motivation you feel toward this particular type of work. So for example, if I were going to be interviewing to work for a landscaping company, my answer might be something like, well, I love being outside. I love working with my hands and using the tools to make beautiful gardens. And it's so wonderful to work with the team. And at the end of the day, we can see what beauty we've created outside. So that's a real heart type of answer, but it's really showing good and strong alignment with the fundamental work. Why do you think we should hire you? Then you might step into, well, I have 3 years of experience working at landscape company XYZ. I know I have used all of the major tools and equipment of doing any kind of soft landscaping. I feel very comfortable. In fact, I love working with teams. So these are relatively short answers, but you're capturing a lot of who you are and why you think there's a good match. And that gives the interviewer then a chance to either explore a little bit more, follow up, or move on to one of these next 3 types of questions. You should expect a question about either your greatest strength or your greatest weakness. We will caution you about answering that weakness question. It's probably not a good thing to say something like, I'm always late. I try, but I'm always late. Much better to think if you can turn that into I can be very cautious sometimes when I'm learning new things. So I want to make sure that I know how much mistakes cost the company. So I try to make sure that I've got the answers right before I finish the job. But I'm always on time once I'm through the training programs. So try to be honest, be accurate, but don't throw yourself in a hole with a question like that. Greatest strengths, we all know what we're great at. That's usually a much easier question. And then finally, these last 2, what was your biggest accomplishment at your previous job, or describe a difficult work situation. Those are trying to get at some specific examples of something that you did well, and a little story about that, or something that was tough to do and how you handled it. And obviously sometimes this was difficult, but here I handled it wonderfully is one of the best stories you can have, if you will, in your pocket to share with that interviewer. So it's really worth spending the time to think about how would I answer this biggest accomplishment question or difficult work situation? What did I do? Those are really helpful questions to think through well in advance. And for all of these questions, practice, practice, practice. Be comfortable. You want to be comfortable with your story, so you're not stumbling through who you are and what you've done. You should know yourself well, and that should come across in the interview. Okay, on to the next slide. Now, the other piece of the interview is, what can the job offer you? As Anne suggested earlier, this is what you're looking for, what you're listening for. And it's not going to be what the interviewer is normally going to spend a lot of time on. Especially a good interviewer is going to want to learn as much as he or she can about you. But what you're going to want to do is make sure that there's a good fit for you. And as Anne mentioned, there are usually two ways of thinking about what a job can offer you. The first is opportunity, and the second is stability. Now, with opportunity, a couple of options that come frequently together: training. Now, this can be in a classroom or it can be on the job, and advancement. And sometimes they're linked. The more training you get, the more likely you will get a promotion or an opportunity for more interesting or challenging work. But they don't have to be linked, but you're listening for that as you're having your interview. Many people find the opportunity to work with others is a huge benefit. A lot of people like to work with other people. You're spending a lot of time at your job, and you like people. This in and of itself can be an important benefit, if you will. And then finally, personal growth. Travel can be part of personal growth, but personal growth, for example, Anne had mentioned, some organizations, some companies want their employees to engage in activities that benefit the community. This may not be job advancement for you, but it gives you a chance to be out and see another part of your community. And for some people, that's wonderful. For some people, it's not. You need to know which side of that coin you're on, if you will. With any of these, do you see any of these types of factors as opportunities? And we're just giving you examples here. On the stability side, that solid company, it's been around for a while. It does a good job of what it does. It's got a good reputation. It treats its employees fairly. It's predictable in its customers, in delivering to its customers. It respects its employees. That can be worth an enormous amount to many people. More important than exactly how much money is being offered, because sometimes those jobs that are less stable, you might be paid more, but there may be a reason you're being paid more, because you may get laid off very quickly if things turn. So you're going to want to be thinking about what kind of a job, back to Anne's point about researching, what kind of a job is actually on offer? What kind of a company is on offer here? Other elements that fall under this stability category, maybe marketable skills that you can develop, that friendly atmosphere that ties back to teamwork sometimes, but it also ties back to the culture of the company, teamwork or not. And then that idea of reliable income. You will be, that sense that, okay, you know what your hours are, they don't keep shifting, and you know what the benefits are, they don't keep changing. So you can plan the rest of your life around that stability. So again, how important is that as far as what the job can offer you? That's your job to be assessing what you learned both before the interview and during the interview. If we can go on to the next slide. And then finally, relative to preparing questions to ask the interviewer. This is a good thing to do in advance. You're thinking about the job, you're thinking about the match, you're thinking about your skills and how well they might serve you. But it's helpful to think through, what might you be interested in knowing more about? It demonstrates your interest to the company and the job. So be prepared to ask a question or two, and they should be based on what you've learned in your research. In other words, you don't want to ask questions that you could easily answer if you looked on the company's website. So you've looked at the website, you've done your research, and you listen during the interview. So again, you don't want to ask questions that interviewer has already told you the answer to. That's just common sense. And again, you might want to ask, what is, to the interviewer, for example, what is the most important element for the job? What's important for doing this job? But you wouldn't want to ask that if he's just been explaining that to you. So you've got to be thinking on your feet about what might be a couple of good questions to ask. So don't ask some of those examples of, you've already been told this, don't ask it again. But also don't ask about salaries and benefits. That comes later. That comes with the job. When they're offering you the job, then you can get into the salaries, the benefits, and that whole question of, do you negotiate, or you just say to yourself, oh, thank goodness, I've got the job. I'll worry about getting a promotion after I've been working there. Again, those are all personal decisions, but you don't want to be asking about salary and benefits right up front. You may know them if the job listing has been posted. Anyway, Deb, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Sure.
So the other thing is, sometimes an interviewer will ask you what you are expecting for pay and benefits, and you just kind of, at that point, you just say, I'm interested in getting the right amount, and we can talk about that later, because once you start talking numbers, you are negotiating, and it's not a good time to do it. They're still interviewing you. They haven't decided to hire you yet.
Yeah.
So just like Barb just said, you need to think about that. And then the other thing that I did want to add, Barb, was that if you heard something in the interview that you want to ask more questions about, that's okay. But you show that you listened by saying, you mentioned the responsibilities that were associated with something, and I just want to ask you a few more details about that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that you're making sure that they know that you weren't ignoring them, and you were listening, but you just want a little bit more information.
And maybe this is a good place to pause and see if anybody has any questions about some of the topics we've covered before we get into the other part of preparation. So this is preparing the thinking part, if you will, for the interview. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to bring up at this point? Hearing none. And the one, I will just add one little piece to Deb's comment relative to asking questions. There are some interviews where it is more of a conversation. So asking the question could come as part of the back and forth between you and the interviewer. You're going to probably be following the interviewer's lead. Some of them control very much the interview, and some of them are encouraging a little bit more of a conversation. And again, it's a judgment call about how to use your time with this person.
And one more thing that just occurred to me is that Barb said this before. You can find lists of the questions that interviewers may ask you, but also online you can probably find some good questions you might think about preparing for you to ask the interviewer online. You can find a lot of lists.
Okay, then let's turn it back to Anne.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So we've talked a little bit about doing research, about thinking, a lot of thinking. Why do you want the job? What are you going to say at the interview? What might the interviewer ask you? So now we're going to turn a little bit more to the practical side of things, how to organize yourself for the interview, all the practical things that you need to do again before the interview. So the first big thing, and this is assuming that you are going to an in-person interview. We'll get in a minute to what happens for a virtual interview, but this is in person. So the first thing you've got to find out is where you're going and how to get there, right? You've got to look up the directions. You've got to decide what kind of transportation you're going to take. Is there public transportation? Do you need to drive? I would always recommend that if possible, you do a dry run if this is going to be a place that you are not really familiar with or you've never been to before. The dry run will help you to figure out how much time you need to get there. It's going to tell you, for example, if you're going to drive, if there's going to be a lot of traffic, if this is a really, really busy road, if you're going to need extra time because there will be traffic. You know, if you need to go on the metro and you're going to change metro, is that easy? Do you need to allow a lot of extra time for that? So always helps to kind of do a dry run and just make sure that you have the timing figured out. You should also plan on being a little bit early. Okay, you do not want to plan on getting there like 2 minutes ahead of time so that one small thing goes wrong and you're rushing and you're anxious and you're stressed out because now you might be late. Okay, so always plan on being a little bit early. I have to say that usually if I'm doing anything like this, I would plan on being quite early, and I might look and see if there's a little coffee shop or something nearby where if I'm, you know, the half hour early that I'm planning, that I can go and spend some time and go and sit and just get myself calm. But, you know, I have somewhere to just, you know, be in that mode of I'm ready for my interview, as opposed to I feel very stressed because I just got here and I've been worrying about the time. So do plan on being a little bit early. Just
Can I say one thing, Anne, on that also? So the other thing that happens in a lot of offices now, if you haven't been in an office, is that there's a front desk and they're going to say, okay, who are you? And they're going to maybe check your ID, or they're going to check to make sure that you have an appointment. And so that also takes time. And so that's another good reason to be early.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So, you know, better to be a little bit too early than arrive and you're actually late, or something happens that you hadn't expected, as Deb just said, that there's some kind of check-in process. So also think about what you're going to bring with you. So usually you want to bring a few things with you, and you would need to put them in some kind of neat bag, especially if you're a woman, or if you're a guy, maybe you want to bring a little portfolio or a briefcase. Okay, but make sure that it's a neat looking bag and that you know where everything is within that bag. Okay, you don't want to be looking for something and have to bring everything out of the bag to try and find it. So keep things well organized in your bag. You want to bring a resume. Sometimes they might ask you to bring a copy of your resume, even if they don't and you already sent it. Never hurts to just bring it with you. Always bring a notebook and pen. Now, this may be for you to write down things as you go along, or it may also be that you wrote down the questions that you wanted to ask, or you jotted some information down that you might use for questions to ask. So it's always absolutely fine to take out your notebook and pen and to refer to things that you have written down ahead of time if you need to, and also to jot down some extra things that you might be told, or even they might say, could you please provide these additional things? You know, once you get home, we need a couple of extra pieces of information. It's really good to be able to write that all down. And you might also want to bring copies of your references. So sometimes they may have asked for your references up front. You may have sent them. Sometimes they may ask you to bring them with you. But again, you know, it does no harm to have extra copies there in case they're asked for. Okay, but again, keep it all very neat and well organized. So on the next slide, now another very big piece is what we're actually going to wear, right? So think about this well ahead of time, and it needs to be professional looking clothing. Okay, so a business suit for men is always appropriate, or for women, the equivalent. So you could either wear a suit, which could be either pants or a skirt with a jacket, or you could wear a nice dress. Okay, but just something that tells you that you look very professional. You never want to go in for bright colors. If it's a men's suit, you know, keep it a dark color. And if it's, again, women's, darker colors are better. You know, this is not the time to wear that really bright pink dress. It's just not the time, okay? Navy or black or a darker color, much better. And please avoid large jewelry, okay? One of the worst things for an interviewer is if you're wearing, say, 3 bracelets and they clink every time you move. And again, you don't want to wear anything that sort of attracts attention. You just want to keep it simple, professional, and please don't wear anything that makes a lot of noise, okay? Especially the bracelets, it can be very irritating. Do pay attention to your footwear. You also want to be wearing sensible, professional looking business footwear, okay? Nothing ruins an outfit more than wearing, you know, very casual looking sandals, the kind of thing you might wear on the beach with your nice business suit, okay? So look at your footwear. If you're not used to wearing high heels, don't suddenly wear high heels, you might fall over, okay? So wear something comfortable, but it's got to look professional. And also do pay attention to your grooming. Okay, you want your hair to be looking nice. You want your, you know, everything about you just to say, I'm a professional. So, you know, if you have hair, don't let it flop over your face. Tie it back maybe if you're a woman, but just make sure that you look very well groomed and professional generally. And if we go to the next slide. So now we'll just talk a little bit about online interviews, okay? Because in these days of COVID, the interview could be in person or it could still be online or in the virtual world. So same kinds of things apply. Do dress for success, okay? Obviously, they will usually only see part of you, usually your head down through your shoulders. So pay special attention again to the fact that you look very nice. In that part of you that can be seen. Try and have a neutral background, okay? This is not the time to have, you know, all your children's artwork and stuff displayed behind you or anything distracting. Make sure that the lighting is good. So sometimes where you're sitting, the sun can be shining in behind you. It will cast either a big shadow or it will make you look extremely pale and as if you can hardly be seen. So, you know, try those things out. Make sure that the light is good. Make sure that you're sitting somewhere where you're comfortable. Do make sure the right amount of you can be seen. So, you know, sometimes I've been in a meeting and we can only see just about, you know, not enough of the person's head. So we really do need to see your whole head and shoulders. We don't want to see just, you know, sort of from your nose downwards. So again, be very careful that you're sitting in the right place and that the right part of you is showing. Do not let there be any other noise. Okay, again, I've been in committee meetings where people have the TV on. It might be in another room, but I can still hear it. So make sure all those things are switched off. You know, if your spouse wants to watch TV, this is not the moment. Tell him, no, please don't do that. I'm having an interview. Okay, don't let the children be interrupting you. Make sure that your fluffy doggy is, again, not in the room and suddenly going to jump on your lap. Okay, so make sure that everything is quiet and calm and that you have no other distractions going on, because it does take the attention of the interviewer away from you and to someone else. Okay, so again, even though it's in the virtual world, you want to be just as professional looking and you want to make sure that everything, again, that surrounds you looks professional. I did see that we got a question from someone, but I think, Deb, you answered it about references.
Yes, so the question was, should we put references in the resume? And the answer is no. And for anybody who was not with us last month, in August, we did a presentation on resumes. And that might be worth looking at, that we had put together some of the things that you should and shouldn't put in your resume and how to set it up. And Raul, that should be available to everybody, I believe. Is that correct?
Okay, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deb. So let's just go on to the next slide. And this is a little summary of what you should do before the interview. So I think we've gone over most things, but just to remind you, first, dress professionally, make sure you're well groomed and everything's neat and tidy. Secondly, prepare your portfolio or what you're going to bring with you ahead of time, and practice finding those pieces of paper so that you know where they are in your bag. Number 3, practice your answers, but this is also very important. Don't make yourself sound like a parrot just repeating something that you learned. Okay, so this is where practice comes in. You have to sound very natural, as if the interviewer asks a question and you're replying to it. You don't want to sound too much like, I learned these 2 sentences, like you're in a play or something, and you're just repeating something. Okay, so it's very important to practice so that you do try and sound as natural as possible. Okay, you're going to do your research on the company and the actual job so that, you know, if questions are asked or you want to ask some questions, you have that knowledge and that vocabulary. Number 5, make sure that you bring any materials that you might need. So we already talked about your resume, your references, and also if you have a business card, bring that too. Number 6, make sure you bring that notebook and that pen. Okay, there may be some things that you've written down that you want to refer to, and there may be some things that you need to write down that the interviewer might ask you to follow up with. Okay, so it's very important to have a notebook and a pen. And from past experience, make sure that you have more than one pen and try and make sure it actually works before you get there. Okay, and lastly, do be on time. Okay, nothing is worse than you arrive late for an interview. And especially if the interviewer is talking to several people, you may be messing up their schedule and you may not get back that time that you missed, right? So you want to be as relaxed and calm as you can. So do make sure you're on time. Okay, so with that, that's everything about getting ready before the interview. And I'll now turn it back to Barb to talk about what happens actually during the interview.
So you can appreciate why we said that most of the work is about the preparation. The interview itself is going to be a lot shorter, and it'll be a lot easier if you spent the time up front with the preparation. So you arrived at the interview in good time. It's important to appear calm. We say appear because most people do not feel calm during interviews, but with a little bit of practice, you can certainly act calm. And that's not the worst thing in the world, to be able to just do that. It will settle you down as well. Relative to this first part of the interview, there are the greetings and introductions, whether you are first introducing yourself at desks and so forth, or when you get to that individual who will be interviewing you. After the pandemic, there's usually a firm handshake. Keep in mind, good eye contact is important, especially in this American culture of ours. If you're looking down at your lap a lot of the time or around, that could be interpreted as being disinterested, way too shy, or not confident in what you're saying or even understanding. So you want to make sure you maintain eye contact. That is a very strong way of communicating to somebody else in this culture. Sit straight, Don't fidget. It's hard when you're nervous not to start, doing a lot of this stuff. But in the first place, it interrupts that attempt at being calm and keeping yourself calm. And again, to Anne's point earlier, the more movement, the more jangling, the more distractions, the harder it is for the interviewer to really hear your messages and to really understand what you're trying to tell that person. So a lot of this is about communication skills and not interfering with your story and your attempt and to sell your skills to this company. Usually the interviewer will introduce the interview with some small talk. This is the, gosh, it's a beautiful day today, or were you on 95 this morning? The traffic was terrible. And a short response like, yeah, the traffic was bad this morning, or beautiful, beautiful day, I agree, is fine. You do not need to go into discussing the weather for the last 2 weeks. This is simply an attempt to warm, to help calm everybody down and then get into the interview itself. And try to think about how to be confident, cheerful, and brief. That would be your mantra as you start to move into the interview. So when we get into the interview, this is what we call the heart of the interview. Keep in mind that that pen and paper that Anne suggested you have can be brought out so you can take notes, but it's important to listen carefully and answer the question that's being asked. To expect those key questions that we've already talked about. So listen for them in particular, and sometimes they're not phrased exactly like we've given them to you. So don't be surprised if they come wrapped in a slightly different vocabulary. Avoid rambling. Rambling is when you say, you start talking and that leads you to another observation, and that reminds you of another story that you could tell, and you're lost in your stories, and your interviewer is wondering, what are you talking about? So back to the point I made earlier, be brief. Think about what is the question, and then offer an answer, a brief answer. The interviewer can always follow up with another question, or that interviewer may be completely satisfied with what you've offered. Let's see, we've talked about eye contact already. And to Anne's point, you want to be positive and professional. You've dressed like a professional. You've presented yourself as a professional. It's simply a question of the nonverbal behavior and the verbal behavior that gets you through usually, what is this, 20, maybe 30 minutes of conversation with somebody who's interested in whether you're a good fit for the company. And finally, ask those prepared questions if appropriate. Now we say if appropriate because perhaps the interviewer doesn't even ask if you have any questions. That person might say, well, this has been quite interesting, Ms. Jackman, and I'll be contacting you later this week. And it's clear that the interview is over. It's probably not the best idea to say, oh, I've got one more question. I was told to have a question. I've got a question. Unless it's something that's important to the wrap-up process. So this is a nice lead into the next slide. Wrapping up. Again, if we're allowed to touch one another, there's the opportunity for the firm handshake and the warm smile. And here where you can follow up with, is there anything further, any information or documentation that the company needs from you, you can be confirming that or asking, do you have everything you need for my application? So save it for at this point, if there is something that is worrying you about whether your application is complete from their perspective. And then finally, of course, thank the interviewer for his or her time, for speaking with you. And ideally, that you enjoyed it very much. If you can say that sincerely. And so always be honest and true to yourself, because you can't stay calm if you're not. And with that, Anne?
Okay, I think there wasn't a question put in the chat. Deb,
Oh,
did you?
okay.
New one?
Yes.
It says, if I can't come in time for the interview because something is out of my control, should I call the interviewer to ask for more time or postpone the interview?
Do you want, go ahead, Anne.
Oh, I was going to say, do you want to answer that?
This is a huge judgment call.
Yeah.
My first question is, how late will you be? You must contact the company and explain what has happened. But you're in not a good situation. And the question is, can you say, whatever the problem was, I can be there in 10 minutes, if that will work for you, for example, or should we reschedule? If you are going to completely miss the time, you're going to be at least an hour late, then what you're asking for is a reschedule. Again, with abject apologies, even if it didn't have anything to do with you, because you're the one who's applying for the job. So it was your responsibility to show up. Does that help? And does Anne or Deb, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was really good advice. I think sometimes there's no hard and fast rule. You just have to sort of see. I mean, if it's kind of a 20-minute interview and you're going to be 15 minutes late, you're going to have to reschedule. There's no question. If it was, 2 separate interviews, 45 minutes each interview, and you're only going to be 10 minutes late, that might be different. But always just, apologize profusely, say the situation, and then really kind of see what the person the other end says, because most likely they'll either say, well, that's fine, we'll expect you 10 minutes late then, or they'll say, I'm sorry, in that case, we're going to have to reschedule. Okay, so take your cue from the person on the other end of the phone. All right, hope that answered the question. Okay, let's go ahead then. We'll ask for more questions at the end also, but let me just give a quick review of what we've covered so far today. So today we really talked about before the interview and then during the interview. So beforehand, there's a lot to be done, as Bob said. You need to learn everything you can about the company, especially what's important to you and the job that you're applying for. You need to think about what you can bring to the job. As Bob said, why would they hire me? Why would these people want me? And then what the job can offer you. What am I hoping to get from this company? I'm obviously interested, but why am I interested? You're going to have to do some planning. You're going to look at those 5 key questions and maybe some others that you find when you're looking online, and you're going to answer all those questions. And you're also going to pick out some questions that you can ask the interviewer. Okay, and again, as Bob said, you don't necessarily have to ask these questions, but it's always good to have some ready just in case the interviewer does say to you, do you have any questions? And you can say something that sounds sensible and sounds as if you're really interested in the company.
So the other thing is, if you have had a long interview and you have heard all answers to the questions that you already had, then you can say, I had questions about, you know, some of these things that you've already discussed. And so I feel confident that I understand those pieces without having to ask you more.
Right. Yeah. Really good point. So that does make it sound like you had done some preparation, but that the interview was thorough and you're happy with it. So again, you know, just it's good to have things ready just in case. But as Bob said, you need to listen very carefully and never ask questions that have already been answered. And then you're going to get yourself organized. So again, this is everything that makes you look professional, from your dress to being on time, or if it's in the virtual world, to having a professional setup, not having distractions. Okay. And then during the interview, you're going to start usually with this greeting and introduction and a little bit of small talk. Usually you won't be the one starting the small talk. The interviewer will say something exactly as Bob said about the weather or the traffic or something general. You really need to be as cheerful as you can. Even if you feel it's not going well, don't suddenly look all frowning and worried. Just stay cheerful. You never know what the interviewer is really thinking. So be cheerful and positive and confident, but do try and be brief. Sometimes I think if you're getting nervous, we all have a tendency, I know I do, to just start rambling, which is just to keep talking. But try not to do that. Try to be brief and to the point. Again, you know, you will be looking for those key questions because you will be very confident that you've prepared good answers and you'll be able to speak naturally to reply to those questions. And if appropriate, you'll be asking questions. And then there will be the little wrap up at the end. And it's really important. I know you're going to be very relieved that the interview is almost over, but be very careful. If the interviewer wants you to follow up with some things, please do write those things down so that you don't forget by the time you get home, okay? So that concludes everything that we were going to tell you today. There is some homework. So what we want you to do next week, we will be giving you a few more tips. We will be revising a little bit what we did today, going over it again. We will be giving you a little bit of extra information, but primarily we will be interviewing you. We will be conducting a practice interview with all of you. So this week, as you leave our virtual world today, you're going to be thinking about what job you would like to apply for. And you're going to choose a job from the following. And again, Raul is going to send you the slides, so you'll have this information. So you can either choose to be a salesperson at a store, for example, Best Buy or, you know, Macy's, any store you like, CVS, doesn't matter. You pick the store and you pick the position, salesperson, cashier, that kind of thing. Or you could choose to be an accounting clerk. That could be in the accounts department of almost any company, but again, pick a company. You could choose to be a nursing assistant. So in this case, it might be for a hospital, say Montgomery MedStar in Olney, or it could be for a health provider. You know, again, up to you to choose the company. You could choose to be a restaurant worker. Again, pick the restaurant. Or it could be anything else. That would be your choice. Okay, so you're going to pick one of these jobs, either one of the 4 jobs that we're giving you specifically, or any other kind of job. And you will be telling us what position you're applying for and also what company you're applying for. Okay, then you're going to do some research on the company that you've chosen. You're going to go back to those 5 what we called key questions that Bob talked about, and you're going to prepare answers to those key questions. So if you remember, it was things like, you know, what do I bring to the job? Why would you want to hire me? That kind of thing. So look back at those and prepare one answer for each of those key questions. And you're also going to do your research and prepare 2 questions that you think will be suitable to ask the interviewer. Okay, so you're going to do all of those things. And then you're going to email Raul with your choice of job and company by this weekend. Okay, the reason that we're asking you to do that is because we, the interviewers, will also have to be doing some preparation. So we'll need to be doing some Googling ourselves about the job and the company that you've chosen so that we can ask you appropriate questions, okay? We do need a couple of days to do that. So you'll let Raul know, and he'll assign he'll assign you, the students, the interviewees, to us, the interviewers, so that we have a chance to come up with some good questions and provide a really good interview, which will be as like a real interview as possible, because we'll be really knowing what you're applying for. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about any of this, please do also email Raul and he'll answer your questions, okay? But this is your homework. We can offer you a much better interview if you tell us what you want to interview for, okay? And it needn't be the real job that you want. If you don't really know what you want to do in the long term, that's fine. Just pick a job so that we can give you a good interview. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, that wraps it up for today. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them now, or if you have any comments. And otherwise, we do hope to see you all next week. And we do hope to give you all a very good interview, and also to give you some tips about what to do after the interview. That will also be a part of next week's presentation. So back to you, Raul.